Alright, welcome back to Beamwiller Reviews, everybody. And today we've got the Green Goblin from XM Studios. Now this is the second big name Spider-Man villain to be released from XM this year. And that leads me to two important questions. Number one, is this the best Green Goblin on the market right now? And number two, is this the last in the XM Spider-Man villain line? Find out in the review next. Alright, the Green Goblin made his debut way back in this issue right here, The Amazing Spider-Man number 14, which came out in 1964. So he's been around almost since the beginning. And back in those early days of Spider-Man, it seemed like there was a new villain popping up in every single issue. But what made the Green Goblin special at the time was we had no idea who he was. His identity wasn't revealed until almost a couple years later in issue number 39, where it was revealed that he was one Norman Osborn. That's right, the father of Peter Parker's then college classmate and future best friend, Harry Osborn. So right away there was this personal connection. Peter was faced with this great dilemma. Does he tell Harry that his dad is a psychotic supervillain? And how does he do that without revealing that he himself is Spider-Man, potentially putting Harry and all their group of friends in mortal danger? So the Green Goblin identity reveal was a big deal, and I think from that point on, for my money, the Green Goblin has become Spider-Man's number one greatest villain of all time. There's a few reasons I feel that way. First of all, he doesn't need 5 other guys to go after Spider-Man. He goes toe-to-toe. In fact, with his Goblin glider, he can take the battle to the air among the rooftops of New York City, kind of mitigating that aerial advantage that Spider-Man has over some of his other villains. Second of all, I mentioned the personal connection with Harry. Harry himself spent some time under the mask as the Green Goblin, so whether it's Norman or Harry under the mask, there was always this intense drama whenever the Green Goblin showed up on the pages of the book. Third, and most importantly, I think there's an argument to be made that the Green Goblin is the only villain to ever truly hurt Spider-Man. And I'm not talking physically, I'm talking long-term emotional scars. You probably know what I'm talking about. It's the death of Gwen Stacy. And if you set aside the death of Uncle Ben, I think the death of Spider-Man's first true love is arguably the most critical event in Spider-Man history. That's something you just never get over. And this man right here is responsible. So for me, he's Spider-Man's number one villain. And he's also my personal favorite Spider-Man villain, but I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to the Green Goblin. I prefer a true classic take on the character. So, is this statue the one for me to finally take his place on the wall here behind me? Well, let's find out. Let's kick off the review with Sculpt Design next. Alright, this statue right here was sculpted and designed by the Kacharik brothers, and they've been around a long time. They've got a great portfolio, and they've done one statue that I know you've seen, and that is the jaw-dropping XM Studios Hulkbuster. So these guys know what they're doing, and anytime their name is attached to a project, one thing comes to mind for me, and that is details, and this statue definitely has that. So let's take a look at the base. You can see the glider crashing through the top of a building here, creating this swath of destruction in its wake. We got concrete here, we've got bricks falling over, we've got these wooden floorboards flying up all over the place, and in this little metal pipe here you've got this rat sticking out. Now the rat is a loose piece, so you can take him out, place him anywhere on the base, but I think he looks best inside the pipe right there. One minor oddity about this base is this random empty space right here. They've just kind of painted it black, and I find it hard to believe that the Kacharik brothers would just leave a spot empty like that, so I kind of wonder what that was supposed to be, but it's kind of a minor detail, so I can get past it. Let's move up and look at the glider. Now this is definitely a modernized take on the glider. So rather than just being a tube of metal spewing flames out the end, we've got this jet turbine engine here. We've got all these mechanical doodads on the underside. And I really like how the wings are attached with these metal hydraulic pistons here. The wings have that iconic bat shape about them. And I really like how the glider is off axis. It gives this sense of agility that he has even while his feet are strapped down to the wings of the glider. So really cool look there. So let's move on to the Goblin himself. This is a bit of a stylized version of the costume, but there's enough classic elements here, I think, to keep people like myself happy. I really like that it has this kind of raggedy look about it. All these torn and frayed edges of his gloves, his boots, and you got this raggedy scarf around his neck. It's got this real homemade look about it, which kind of contrasts with the super high-tech glider under his feet. I like the flow of the statue. You can see the tail of his hat, the cuff of his boots, the bag around his shoulder all kind of flowing to one side. It gives this real great sense of motion. And one cool little detail about the bag is you can see the flap of it is just open enough that you can see a little pumpkin bomb inside. This pumpkin bomb right here definitely has an old school look about it, which I really like, but it doesn't quite jive with the pumpkin bombs on the XM Spiderman statue, which is kind of hidden on the shelf over here behind me. I really like the scales on the skin. I think they did an excellent job with that. But he does have this kind of strange spiky armor on his thighs and his shoulders, which if I could change one thing about this statue, it would be that. I would take that away. And I think if you could, you'd have a much more classic looking Green Goblin on your hands. Now, the success of any Green Goblin statue for me personally comes down to the mask. It's a very critical component of any Green Goblin statue. And for me, I have my own kind of Green Goblin mask rating scale. It goes from straight up classic on one end to Lord of the Rings on the other end. And I think this mask kind of lies maybe just over halfway towards the Lord of the Rings end of the scale. Still tolerable for me. There's enough of a classic look here. It still looks like it could be a man wearing a mask, but they've incorporated a bit of a monstrous vibe into it. So overall, it's a cool looking mask. And even though this isn't my ideal version of the Green Goblin, I have to admit that the Kacharik brothers killed this sculpt. They did a tremendous job here. There's lots to like and lots to take in. The statue has a few switch out parts, so let's take a look at those next. Alright, let's run through the switch outs on this piece real quick here, and right away you're going to notice the unmasked Norman Osborn portrait, and I think they've done a pretty good job with this. You know, he's always had that sort of weird, wavy, tight, curly hairdo, and they've done a nice job replicating that here. He has that evil snarl across his face. He's baring his teeth at you just like any maniac supervillain should be doing. So overall, nice job with it. I think the skin tones maybe could have been a bit better there, but still a pretty cool look for the piece. And of course, if the mask is not on his face, it must be in his hand. So you have the swap out left arm holding the Goblin mask. It's too bad that you can't use this arm for the mask version. This hand does come off, so it would have been nice to have an alternate hand, maybe holding a pumpkin bomb or something like that, so you could use this option for the masked version. But as it is, this left arm only works for this display. And last but not least, you have the switch out right arm where he's holding his sort of bat-shaped throwing knives. I'm not going to call him a batarang because I think that might be trademarked by some other character, but these are kind of neat. They have a hinge in the middle. It gives them a little bit of a butterfly knife type appearance. So kind of a neat option, but I'll be honest, I have no intention of displaying any of these because for me, it's pumpkin bomb all the way. And as I said, previous segment, it's kind of all about that mask. So he's got to have it on his face. So nice to have options for the piece. Let's move on and talk about paint next. Alright, as promised, let's talk about the paint on this piece. Let's start with the base. Not a lot to talk about here. We've got some gray concrete, some red brick here, and you got the brown wooden floorboards, some rusty rebar. So overall, it looks pretty good. The glider has a two-tone finish to it. You can see these parts of the wings here and parts of the front hood ornament have more of a almost a gunmetal type finish mixed with a more traditional metallic silver. There's quite a bit of scuffs and scratches on there, some battle damage. I mean, he is flying through a building after all, so that's to be expected. I really like the singed end of the exhaust here. You got the blue to orange, giving that sign of intense heat at that location. So the glider looks pretty good overall. The Goblin, love the look of the skin. They mixed some darker greens, some yellowy greens, and some brown in there, and the overall finish is really, really nice. The costume, you got this more modern kind of bluish purple on the boots and gloves and hat, and then his vest has more of a reddish finish to it. And in the old school comics, he definitely had more of a pinkish, reddish, purple finish about his costume. So I'm not sure if that's the look they were going for, but that's definitely the vibe that I get. So I like that mix of kind of old and new with the colors on his costume. The mouth and teeth look excellent on this statue. Very realistic look. Got that wet kind of finish about them. My one complaint about the paint on this piece, though, is with the mask. They've mixed in some dark green with some lighter yellowish colors. And I think they went a little heavy with the lighter highlights, and it gives his mask, the skin there, a little bit of a watermelon-y look. So that's probably the one area I think that could have been improved. They could have toned that down maybe a little bit. But otherwise, I think the paint job here is really, really good. All right, let's move on. We're going to talk production and build quality. And first things first, you got your packing guide, which is always handy to have. Shows you where all the parts go back in the box. Flip side, registration instructions, QR code links you to the assembly video. You're definitely going to want to have that queued up as you put yours together. There's quite a few little pieces that you're probably going to wonder where they go. Lastly, you get the art print here, and it's a pretty nice art print actually, and they got Spiderman in the background here kind of chasing the Goblin down. So nice art print. Some of the statues will come with this metal plaque. It has a little kickstand on the back. You can display that next to your statue. So a nice little bonus for the early bird orders of this piece. Now once you get it all together, it does feel remarkably sturdy and stable, which is something I was a little bit worried about with these wings. I was concerned with how they were going to react to the weight of the body, but as I said, it feels very sturdy, and I'm really happy with the engineering on this piece. Overall, it's a really nice quality piece, but I do have a few nitpicks to note. First of all, the bag strap. It is a leather strap, so a little bit of mixed media. Was really difficult to get on. You have to work it over his right shoulder to his left, and it's an extremely tight fit. I wonder why they didn't just have the strap disconnect from one side of the bag. You could just wrap it around and maybe connect it with magnets or something like that. Would have been much easier. Secondly, on the hat, you'll see this flap here on the side is a separate piece. There's a little bit of a seam there, but that's not really my issue. My issue is the flap on the left side of his face is fused to the side of his cheek. And in this day and age, there's just no reason for that. That flap should have been a separate piece. It would have just completed the overall look of the hat. It would have looked so much better. I can live with it, but as I said, in this day and age, I don't think there's any excuse for that type of casting. So that definitely could have been done better. Lastly, I want to show you my switch out left arm. You'll see how the key is all white. That's because I had to file it down fairly significantly to get that glove to fit. Out of the box, it didn't fit. It wasn't even close. So as an isolated incident, it's not the end of the world. I fixed it. Everything goes together now and looks great. But in the bigger picture, those types of QC issues are starting to pop up a little bit more frequently for XM. They're a growing company. They're putting out statues at a much faster rate than they ever have, which is, on one hand, that's great for us collectors. We get our stuff sooner. On the other hand, QC issues start to fall through the cracks. So hopefully, just a little bit of a bump in the road for XM, because it's much easier to lose the trust of your fan base than it is to get it back. So as I said, hopefully they can tighten up the QC a little bit. But overall, this statue, other than those few issues, is pretty good. All right, it's time to wrap up this review of the XM Studios Green Goblin. And I think when you add up all the elements of the statue, in spite of the minor issues and nitpicks that I have, I think this is the best Green Goblin on the market right now. You got the incredible Kucharik Brothers sculpt. Even though it's not my ideal version of the character, I think there's enough classic and modern elements here to please both crowds. I love the dynamic pose. I love the glider. It's got a solid paint job, and the engineering on this is really, really sound. I'm really happy with how this statue was built. So this statue, as soon as I'm done recording this, I'm going to move it onto the shelf behind me into its forever home, and that kind of puts a bit of a bow on my Spider-Man villains collection. It's strangely emotional, but still satisfying. I've been spending a lot of years putting this collection together, and I wonder, is this going to be the last piece? Because are there any new Spider-Man villains in the works? We'll have to wait and see. I don't think so. There's talk of a Rhino possibly. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see a Hobgoblin. I think he's an essential villain for the Spider-Man line, but nothing in the works as far as I know right now. So could this be the last one? Well, if it is, I'm pretty happy with it, and I hope you guys enjoyed the review, the XM Studios Green Goblin. Stay tuned to the channel, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys soon.